Hello, today's video is going to be all about paranormal experiences. Some scary, some sad. These are all said to be real. You may believe it or you may not. But either way, I hope you enjoy it. Today's video will also feature two narrators that deserve way more subs than they currently have. If you like their narrations, their channel links will be in the description. Please subscribe to their channel and subscribe to mine if you aren't already. Also, I have links to my Twitter, my merch shop, and my email address where you can send your own scary story in and I'll read it on a subscriber story video. So on to the video. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Back in 2012, I was a senior in high school. One time, I babysat the infant son of a couple who were close family friends. I put the baby down to bed early, probably around 8 o'clock or so. He slept upstairs while I chilled downstairs in the living room watching some TV with the baby monitor nearby. The parents said that they would be back around midnight. At around 11 o'clock, I hear the baby screaming through the baby monitor. And I don't mean crying, I mean screaming. I worked at a daycare all through high school, and even to this day, I have never heard a baby scream like this. He didn't sound like he was upset, or crying for food, or a diaper change. The scream made the hairs on my arm and the back of my neck stand up, as if my instincts could pick up on some kind of primal terror infected within. I ran upstairs, opened the door of the baby's room, and turned on the lights. He was there, standing in the crib, holding himself up on the rail with one hand. His other hand was pointing at the closet. Still screaming, I picked him up and calmed him down a little bit as I patted him on the back. I brought him downstairs with me. His parents were going to be home within an hour. I didn't have courage to check the closet at the time. I'm not ashamed to say it freaked me out, as it was just me and the baby in the house. The parents arrived home around midnight, as they said. Confusion and frustration as to why the baby was still awake with me downstairs. When they questioned me about this, I told them what happened. I thought I would sound like an idiot. I was kind of worried about how I would explain it leading up to their arrival. However, when I said what happened, the mother's expression dropped. She shook her head and welled up, obvious distraught, and took her son upstairs without a word. Weird, because remember, these are family friends. We were usually on good terms. The father apologized on her behalf and for what I had experienced. Then he shared that his wife has been seeing a ghost of a Civil War soldier standing at the foot of their bed. He had never seen it, but he knew her fear was real and that they didn't know how to explain it. I never experienced anything paranormal myself that night. However, I have never seen anyone react with such fear and distress for seemingly no reason ever since. The way the baby screamed, the way the mother's demeanor immediately changed when I said what happened, is what still gives me the creeps. So I was about 11 years old. I'm 24 now, and it was my best friend's birthday. Me and many of my friends were supposed to meet at his house, have a little cake, and then go to the movies and watch Spider-Man. So yeah, I was really excited. So the day comes, and I really wanted to arrive early. So I asked my mom to drive me there at 2 p.m. instead of 3 p.m. And it was usually just a 10-minute drive. We arrived and rang the doorbell, and the housemaid answers. "Hi, I'm here for Jamie's birthday." She looked confused. We're going to the movies later?" "I'm sorry. They left like 2 hours ago. It's 5 p.m. "Oh, okay. Sorry, bye." I walked back to my car, where my mom was still waiting, and told her everything. We checked the time, and in fact, 3 hours had passed since we left the house. We thought it had been our fault. Maybe the clock's wrong or something. That was until we got home and my dad was waiting for us, all worried, as we were missing for 4 hours and calls were not reaching my mom's cell phone. Sometimes I talk about this with my mom, and it still freaks us out. Has this happened to any of you guys? I'm in real estate. Also, for privacy, I've changed the names of the clients. One of the few haunting things I've experienced. Anyway, my clients, Jim and Pam, have been looking for a home to buy for a while. We'd seen a few houses that were in the price range, but it didn't have the features they wanted. So when a home matching their requirements and price point popped up in the market, we were all more than motivated to give it a look and hopefully make an offer. We scheduled a showing for 7 p.m. that evening. I didn't have much going on that day, so I got there around 6:45. And since I still had 15 minutes before the buyers would get there, I decided to look through the house, also turn on the lights, as it was very dark, and turning on the lights for a showing is always a good idea. When I walk into the house, right away, I notice it's fairly nice for the price it's at. Seems to be underpriced by at least $10,000, if not more. And this gets me excited. I know the buyers are going to want to make an offer, so I just have to make sure there's nothing super awful. As I make my way through the rooms, turning on lights, I come upon an intercom in the hallway next to the kitchen. I press it and talk through it and hear that the other receiver is directly below me in the basement. Very cool, as I've only seen intercoms in movies. Then I walk through the door frame into the kitchen. The counters and cupboards look nice, but cheap. And I notice the refrigerator is open. Must have been bad suction, or someone left it open, I think to myself, and I go over and shut it. I give it a little tug, but it seems sealed pretty well, so I figure someone from previous showing left it open. Even though the refrigerator had nothing in it, it's still rude of the last agent to not do a once over and shut it. As I mull this over, the intercom buzzes and static comes through. I slowly walk into the hallway as it continues, and am a few steps away, and it cuts out. Must have an electric shortage or something downstairs. I hadn't gone downstairs yet, so I figure I might as well turn on the lights and check out what was going on with the intercom. The basement doesn't have a switch, just one of those pull string attached to the light in the middle of the room. The light from the outside is just enough so I can see where I'm going, but not much more. Before I can pull the string, I hear the intercom buzz back on, but this time it's static through the basement receiver. So the interference is coming from upstairs now. Not really sure what's going on at this point. I turn on the light and run upstairs. Again, the intercom stops as soon as I get close. But something in the kitchen catches my eye. I walk into the kitchen and find that every cupboard, drawer, and the refrigerator is wide open. My heart sinks and the hairs on my neck stand. At this point the scare was over, and the clients called to let me know they just arrived. I hurriedly slammed everything shut and tried to act normal for a bit. When I opened the door, Jim asked if I was feeling alright. I assumed I was slightly pale. We quickly walked through the house. Nothing opened this time, and afterwards I asked how they felt about the house. They both agreed that something felt off and dark about the house. I told them I sensed that too, but didn't go into detail. Needless to say, we didn't write an offer, and I've never gone back. Definitely creeped me out, and is definitely haunted. This just happened about 2 hours ago, and I'm still shaking. I live on the coast of South Carolina, and my backyard is directly on the marsh. I woke up and went downstairs to the bathroom. I kept having a weird nagging feeling like I was forgetting something, or something was off. So I went to find my mother. She's a night owl, and usually stays up super late doing gardening stuff, and she likes to feed the raccoons. I went into the backyard and saw her about 100 yards from the back door facing the marsh. I called out to her, but she didn't hear me, so I started to walk out to her. Once I started getting closer, she turned to face me with a complete blank expression. So I asked her what was wrong. I was about 12 feet away from her, and she turned back towards the marsh. Then the back door opened, and I turned to see my mom standing on the deck, and she called out asking what I was doing. I've never ran so fast in my life, but I looked back at the marsh and I could see that thing disappearing. It looked like my mom. I yelled at my mom to go inside, and something was out here. I told her what I saw, and I've been crying and shaking ever since. We wake up my husband and my dad, and they'd think I must have still been in a sleep state and I dreamed it or something. I can't stop shaking. What the fuck just happened? Am I crazy? Did something lure me outside to the marsh? I must be losing my damn mind, but I know what I saw. The last week of July last year, I went to Ocean City, Maryland, with my boyfriend at the time. The first few nights were great, and I got to see my longtime friend who lives there, and he was tagging along the night this happened. My boyfriend and friend decided they wanted to go get crab fries. I wasn't really interested in eating that, so I decided to sit on a bench and wait for them. I saw a family go by, and I saw the daughter walking behind them. She looked really mad and was texting quickly as if she was in a really heated argument. She had short bleached white hair and really sick tattoos. That's what made her stick out to me. Her tattoos. They were awesome. So anyway, my boyfriend and friend come back over, and we walked behind the family for a while. We ended up getting distracted by the boardwalk performers, and I lost sight of them, but I didn't think anything of it. Around 2 a.m., we were some of the only people on the boardwalk besides a small group of drunk teenagers smoking cigarettes and yelling. And I saw her again, running towards the beach crying. I wanted to ask her if she was okay, but my boyfriend advised me just to stay out of it and keep going. We went to the hotel and fell asleep. About 6 in the morning, I got up and rolled a joint and quietly left the room. The hotel where we stayed at had a nice sitting area out front looking over the ocean. I admired the view for a few minutes when I noticed her again. She was walking down the boardwalk, looking confused and scared. She was still crying. I got a weird gut feeling to follow her, so I tucked my joint into my clutch and followed a little bit behind her. She looked nervous and was looking over her left and right as if she was lost. I followed her all the way to the 2nd Street beach ramp. She suddenly busted out in a full sprint, crying hysterically. I don't know why, but I shouted, "Hey, wait, do you need help?" I ran to the beach and just stood in shock. Nobody was there, but I could hear soft sobbing nearby to the right of me. I walked down the beach a little ways before I saw it. Where the sobbing sounds had led me, there was an arm sticking out from under the sand. It was her arm. It was her tattoos. I'll never forget them. The sobbing stopped, and suddenly, the ambient noises of the beach became louder again. I didn't notice that at the time, but the whole time I was following her, and then following the crying, everything else was completely silent. When I realized what I'm looking at, I screamed for someone to call 911. A middle-aged couple came jogging up to me. The wife screamed and the husband dialed 911 right away. The police arrived a little later. When I took my statement, I didn't know what to tell them. I said I'd been walking down the beach and I just found her. It took them hours to dig her out. When they finally started pulling her out, they asked all the civilians and witnesses to be led away. As we were walking with the police to a nearby spot to answer more questions, I saw her standing behind them, looking down at her own body. She looked up at me and nodded, and then she was gone. All said that she sat in a hole and it collapsed around her, but then it was later discovered that the big sand cleaners may have pushed the sand into the hole by mistake. But here's where it gets scary. She had been missing since 2 a.m. She died between 2 to 3 a.m., and yet I still followed her the entire time, and I swear she looked real. I still have dreams about her. Firstly, 2 things you should know about me. One is that I've always believed that there could be something out there, but no matter how many haunted houses or places that my friends who have experienced the paranormal and said were definitely haunted, I've never experienced anything paranormal. There were teeny incidents here and there, but I have never experienced anything that made me sure that something paranormal was happening. 2 is that my dad collects antique stuff. Some are 100 years old, and he recently bought a particularly old clock, which may be connected. It started 4 days ago, when said clock entered our household. I was half asleep until I heard my sister's voice, which she was currently in another country, and I thought I was dreaming. I got up to get water, laid down, and felt like something resembling a breath against my ear, and my sister's voice, "Wake up." I get up, call my boyfriend, then blame it on my meds and go back to sleep. Never mentioned this to anyone again. The second encounter, I was taking a nap. I was woken up by the door opening and my father's voice telling me to get downstairs. I did. Him and my mom were both watching Game of Thrones and were pretty weirded out, told me I dreamt it. The third encounter happened to my mom. She asked me if I was whispering in her ear last night, or was that a dream? She said it was strange because it felt like someone was breathing on her neck. I told her I had a similar encounter, but she thinks I'm joking. She doesn't believe in the supernatural. The fourth encounter. So today, I'm watching TV, and one of my posters falls off. So jokingly I say, "Hey, if you're here, just know that I mean no harm to you, but can you give me a sign?" And my wax beads fell from the box. And I'm trying to tell myself that's just a coincidence, but I can't. Not anymore. I'm scared now. Please tell me what to do.
I used to explore foreclosed and abandoned houses when I was in high school. I ran into something angry in one house. So this story takes place around the time of the housing crisis back in 2008 or so. I was in high school at the time. A buddy, I'll call Eric, and myself would do some urban exploring by sneaking into empty, abandoned, and foreclosed homes. Of course, we'd do these explorations in the dead of night to avoid any trouble with the law. I can't give away the location because people now live there, and I have no scientific rational explanation for what happened, but I know what I saw and I know what I heard. I'd like to share it with you all. So we set out around 12 a.m., and about an hour or so in, we find a house that I often saw on my walks to school. As we walk up to the house, we scanned for anyone, and then we made our way down the large driveway that leads into the backyard of the house. The first thing I noticed is how tall the grass was, like it hadn't been mowed in quite some time. Months, I'd say. Then I noticed a smaller house farther near the back of the property. We told ourselves we'd check that house out once we've explored the bigger one. We enter the bigger house from the door that leads into the garage, and from the garage we stepped into the kitchen. Believe it or not, the doors were unlocked. When we enter the kitchen, we see the house was almost pitch black. We can only see a few feet ahead thanks to the streetlights, so I used my only light source at the time, a cheap flip phone with the screen brightness on max. We start our exploration down the hallway and check out each room, 5 in total counting the 2 living rooms. Eric is close behind me as we make our way through each room and eventually back to the kitchen. Once in the kitchen, we chat about how nice the house is and its size given the area it's in, much bigger than the surrounding houses. As we're talking, I notice a metal decoration hanging above the kitchen doorway. It almost looked like some sort of decorative shield. I pull it from its spot and inspect it closely. Once done, I can't figure out how to put it back, so I set it between my feet on the tile floor. I take a look at my friend and take a step into the kitchen. Then we both hear what sounds like something sliding along the floor, and then a bang at the end of the hall. Eric and I both freeze and stare at one another through the streetlight shining through the kitchen window. Eric whispers to me, "Is there someone here with us? Did someone follow us in?" I honestly didn't know, but after a minute or two, we decide to walk down the hall and see what the noise was. As the light on my phone creeps the end of the wall, we see the shield I had just pulled down. We were both relieved, and I thought, well, maybe I kicked it when I stepped and didn't notice. I picked it up, and this time I figure out how it needs to be attached to its original position. Once again, I look at Eric and take a step towards him, and hear a few clangs on the floor, and that familiar sliding sound, and the bang against the wall. Now we're really scared and frozen, not moving for what seemed like forever. Then an even louder bang is heard at the other end of the house, and we both jump and stare into the dark hallway. Then again, bang, and then quiet. Then 3 rapid bangs. Someone was thrashing around in the very last room in the house, and we didn't know what the fuck to do. Determined not to let this person scare us, we run towards the last room to confront this asshole. When we get there, nothing. No one. The room was empty. But how? Who? We were sure it was coming from this room. There's no way whoever it was slipped by us. The room had a sliding glass door leading into the backyard, but it was locked from the inside. Then before we can gather our thoughts and ask each other what was happening, bang, 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 this time from the kitchen. Scared out of my fucking mind, we both agree it's time to leave. We make our way through the back door in the room and finally to the street, all while checking over our shoulders to ensure no one was going to come running out of the house after us. No one came, and the neighborhood was quiet. Eric and I start walking home, talking about the house when Eric notices his pocket knife is missing. He then turns his pockets inside out to show me he isn't joking. We stop and he keeps telling me we have to go back since it's his favorite one. Frustrated, I asked him, "How did you lose your favorite knife?" He assures me he never removed it from his pocket and has no idea how it could have been removed. I agree to go with him and find it. We make it halfway up the street. Then Eric tells me his back feels like it's on fire. I can see it's really bothering him because of the expression of pain on his face. He asked me to lift his shirt and look at what could be causing the burning. I lift his shirt and quickly notice 3 very large scratches, starting from his right shoulder blade, going all the way down to his left hip, then from his left hip across to his right hip. I tell him this, and he immediately says the house is haunted, but he still wants to get the knife. I'm scared, but I'm not going to let him do it alone. So we make our way back into the house and immediately hear that banging noise. But we made a pact with each other that we wouldn't run no matter what happened. We begin our search for the knife, looking high and low, all while hearing banging, and now things are being thrown across the room. Of course, I'm fucking scared shitless. I want to leave, but we haven't found the knife yet. We do one pass through the entire house and end up in the kitchen. In the kitchen, there's an entrance to the second living room that you can see from the backyard. In that room, there's one piece of furniture, a hutch. Now, we had already checked this room since it's near our point of entrance and found nothing. But we decide one more pass through the room wouldn't hurt. I make my way into the dark room and let my light lead me to the hutch. And there it is. On the hutch, we found the knife. But for fucking sure, we check this room and the hutch. He didn't hesitate for a moment. He grabbed the knife and we hightailed it out through the garage and back onto the street. This is far from the end of the story, but to summarize, this house is fucked up. The rest of the story includes shadow figures leaping from the bushes, dozens of light bulbs shattering at once, and a knife jammed deep into the front door of the home. Thanks for reading. Update number 1. I decided to add more to the post. We made our way back to our homes, but the entire week we would do nothing but talk about the house and what was going on there. We brushed it off and didn't believe it. There had to be some explanation. So we go back. But we bring 3 friends with us because they wanted to see the haunted house Eric and I wouldn't shut up about. While walking through the backyard, I can't explain it, but for some reason I wanted to get a closer look at the back house. I start making my way towards the house, but I start to feel scared. A sense of dread came out of nowhere. I turn away from the house and start my way back to the group, but at the corner of my eye, I saw something leap from the bushes. Some dark figure leaped into the tall grass, but when I gave it my full attention, it was gone. I stared at the bushes for a moment, a little confused, but I brushed it off. I did mention it to the group when I caught up with them, but it was quickly dismissed. We enter through the garage door. This time we noticed a white bookshelf full of light bulbs in the garage. The bookshelf was probably about 5 feet high and 3 feet wide, and completely filled with packaged light bulbs. We study it for a moment and make our way into the kitchen, with Eric leading and me in the back. I enter last and shut the kitchen garage door behind me. As soon as I release the doorknob, we hear what sounded like someone in the garage breaking all the light bulbs on the bookshelf. Stunned, I remember my heart beating a mile a minute, waiting for whatever the fuck it was to start trying to fight its way into the kitchen. But nothing came, and Eric finally said, "Fuck, I guess we're not going back now." We make our way to the very last room in the house. The same room Eric and I had exited through the last time we were there. Whatever it was did not disappoint. Random objects were being thrown against the wall in front of us. We could hear loud banging all through the dark house, like there were people fighting in the damn house. One of my friends decides he's had enough and opens the glass door to the backyard, and 4 of us start making our way through. I turn around to wait for Eric. He wasn't moving. Caught in a daze, standing in front of an unhinged door that was propped against the wall for support. Eric was staring down the hallway, as if waiting for something. I had to call his name 3 times before he realized we were leaving. He stepped forward, and before my eyes, it looked as though someone tried to throw the unhinged door on top of him. Eric jumped out of the way and started towards me, scared out of his wits. The other 3 are already almost to the street, so we both just keep the pace and catch up with them. As soon as we reached the street, one of our friends kept telling us how fucked up that house was. You can see the look of terror on his face as he expressed his feelings about the place. He then mentions a burning feeling going up his calf. Sure enough, he's got those fucking scratches starting from his ankle and stopping midway through his calf. Just before we split up to go home, the 3 of them swear off that place. And that was the last time those 3 friends spoke to us. So there's more to come. Unfortunately, I'm on a time constraint, but we'll definitely be telling more of what happened. Again, thanks for reading. Final update. We ended up going to the house a few times after that, but nothing absolutely memorable happened. We heard the knocks and the bangs and whatnot. It wasn't until we took Eric's older brother, I'll call him Derek for clarity and privacy, that it got crazy. By this time, we'd visited the house a few times and became numb to the banging and throwing. We found it more amusing than anything. Like, check this place out, it's haunted. This time, it got more aggressive. After touring the house and seeing Derek freak out, we decided to have a chat in the kitchen. I was standing in front of the window. Eric was to my right, leaning against the wall, and Derek was standing across from me in the front of the doorway that leads into the second living room I mentioned earlier. We talk about how scary the house is and all that. Derek turned around to check out the living room behind him. I mentioned to him that that's the hutch we found Eric's knife on after running around the whole house searching for it. As he turns to face me, Derek fell into the room almost like being pushed or dragged from behind. I remember looking at his face and seeing a look of terror as he tried to grab on for dear life to the doorway. But the push or pull was too strong, and he fell on his ass into the room, but immediately jumped up and ran over to me. He grabbed me by his shirt and started screaming at me, "Yo, what the fuck is your problem? Why'd you push me?" I kept telling him I didn't push him, and Eric jumped between us and confirmed what I was saying. He didn't push you, you fell in. Derek explains that someone, or something, pushed him in. After that, he obviously wanted to leave, so we all agreed. But before we leave, Eric and I both told Derek to check his pockets to see if anything was missing. Of course, his pocket knife is missing. But it's okay, right? We found the last one, we'll find this one, right? We searched the whole house and found nothing, as expected. Now it's time to check the hutch. First pass, nothing. Second pass, nothing. Third, nothing. And now this knife is really fucking gone. Derek wants one more pass through the house. We agree. We make it to the far room with no luck. We started making our way back to the kitchen with me leading. As I'm coming up to the kitchen, my cell phone light starts to reflect off something shining in the front of the door that leads into the front yard. It was the fucking knife jammed deep into the door. There's no fucking way that the knife could have been jammed into the door without any of us hearing it. Derek takes his knife and we fucking leave. I never went back after that. Out of all the bullshit that went down in that house, that was the not welcome sign I took seriously. And that's it. That's everything I can remember. Eric moved not long after that, and I moved away at the end of 2009. I haven't seen the house since, except when I tell the story to my friends, I'll pull up the house on Google Images. I visit Eric from time to time, and we always talk about what happened there. Thank you for being open and understanding.
I don't even know where to start. I guess I'll just write it all in chronological order from when I heard other people's stories and then experienced what it was for myself. To preface this, I should mention that it all took place back home on my reservation. I'm Algonquin First Nation from Canada. Another thing I should mention is that on the res, traditional beliefs and legends of the paranormal are still a big part of our community. The attitude of most people towards the paranormal is one of assurance. To us, the paranormal is a regular part of life. We believe in a spirit world, and we believe that sometimes these beings can cross over into our world and maybe even live among us. When I tell paranormal stories to my non-native friends, they're always in such disbelief that things like this have actually happened, and how casually I talk about it. But it's only because it's been so normalized for me. Where they have absolutely no paranormal experiences, I have a bunch, and most everyone I know on the res has even more than I do. I don't really care to explain it. Maybe we're all crazy from drinking our toxic tap water. I don't know. Anyway, here's the story. This all happened in the fall of 2011 when I was 16 years old. I was living in a nearby city with my mom so that I could get a better education than the one I could get back home. But we go back every single weekend to see my dad and little brother. One Friday, during the drive back home, I got a text from a friend of mine. She told me about a party that was happening that night and asked me when I'd be home so they could come pick me up. I gave her a time and that was that. We get home and as soon as we stepped inside the house, we see my dad and my cousin sitting at the table drinking some beers. They're both cops on the res, so usually beers with his partner on a Friday evening means they've had a particularly tough week at work. Typically, the toughest cases to deal with are the child abuse and molestation ones. So a part of me felt sad immediately that something bad had happened. They both looked tired and drained, but they are happy to see us. We say our greetings, catch up a little, and my dad asks me if I have any plans. I tell him about the party and where it'll be, and he and our cousin share a weird look. "Why are you guys making that face? Did something happen?" I asked. "I don't know. Should we tell her?" my cousin said, looking at my dad. He laughed, and they decided that I should probably know what's been going on since I'd be going to a cottage pretty deep in the woods later that evening. They start with the first strange call they got on a Monday night. An older woman called saying that people were outside of her house knocking on all of her windows. She said she couldn't see anybody, but there must have been at least 3 people, judging by all the different locations of the knocking. They arrive at the woman's house, inspected all around the house, even checked the woods, but nothing came up. They tell her that it's probably just some teenagers playing tricks on her, and that there isn't much else they can do besides patrol around the area in case they come back. On Wednesday night, the same woman called again with the same problem. It had rained that day, and there was mud all around this woman's home, so they figure that at the very least they'd find footprints, but they couldn't find a thing. This is when they started feeling like something was off, because one of the windows where the woman was adamant about there being knocking was completely impossible to get to without stepping through this huge mud puddle. This is when they started to think that the woman was lying, but they just told her the same thing they told her a few nights prior. By Thursday night, everyone on the res had been talking about these strange experiences. It turns out, this woman wasn't the only one experiencing the knocking. She was just the only one to call the police. I mean, all of this was taking place on a res, so it wasn't long before people were linking it to supernatural causes. My dad was still sure it was just a group of teens pranking people, but then they got another call from the same woman for the same reason. They rushed over and were met with the same situation, except this time, the neighbor walked over looking pale as a ghost. He says, "Is this about the knocking?" They notice he's a little shaky. "Yeah, did you see something?" they asked him. The man nodded and said, "You guys are gonna think I'm crazy, but yeah." And he goes on to explain what he saw. He said that he'd stepped outside for a cigarette on his front porch when he heard knocking. He looked around to see where it was coming from, and when he looked to his neighbor's house, he saw it. There was a black figure standing outside the woman's window, the same one with the mud puddle I mentioned. It was looking into her home. He said it looked humanoid in stature, but completely made out of shadow. You could tell it was something solid-ish, but you couldn't make out any features on it. He stared at it, completely in shock, and watched the thing as it knocked a couple of times, and then darted around the house knocking on every single window. He said it moved too fast to be human. It was practically a blur. It went around the house a few times, then ran across the road into the tree line, behind one tree in particular. The man was frozen, but he couldn't look away. It then leaned out from behind the tree, staring directly at him with yellow eyes that reflected the light, similarly to a cat's. And then it smiled, showing its small but numerous pointed and sharp teeth. I almost shit my pants. He attempted a joke, but his voice was still shaking. Fast forward to Friday. Stories are being exchanged all over the res about other sightings and experiences people were having. On top of multiple people experiencing the knocking, there were also quite a few sightings with everyone describing the creature in the same way. One woman was bringing her trash bin to the road, and she thought she saw someone in her peripheral vision, standing near the trees. She walked back up the driveway and into her home, feeling like she was being watched. Right before she was about to open her door to go back inside her home, she looked back and saw 2 reflective yellow eyes watching her from the trees. She said it was about 5 feet above the ground. Another couple was driving home at night, and they saw a humanoid figure standing in the middle of the road. As they got closer, they slowed down, and it turned around to face them. That's when they saw the reflective yellow eyes and the sharp, pointed teeth as it smiled at them. They stopped the car, too afraid to go any closer to it, until they decided to just drive past it. Being on a narrow road, they drove past it with the figure being only a few feet from the window, staring at them the whole time. "You sure you still want to go to that party?" my dad asks. But my friends were already pulling into the driveway. I gave my family hugs and kisses goodbye,
and they told me to be careful, but I felt fine. A common belief among native people is that negative energy attracts negative energy. Therefore, an evil spirit will be drawn to people with unresolved issues, traumas, and sinners, I suppose. If you're someone who is spiritual, self-aware, and basically a good person, that, in and of itself, will be protective. I get to the party, and within 20 minutes, the conversation shifts towards all the paranormal experiences people have been having. I'm really curious about what everyone has to say, because they have stories that I hadn't heard yet. But my friend, us being 16 and all, couldn't hold her alcohol very well, and was crying about how she wishes she was closer with her brother. I was trying to make her feel better while listening to everyone's stories. One of the people at the party was related to the neighbour of the woman who was calling the police. The experience really shook him up, and my friend was just explaining everything that he was doing later on. For one, he smudged his entire home, which is something our people do when we're looking for extra protection against paranormal entities. He also went to visit multiple elders around the community, asking for advice and any information they had on similar happenings. What we do know about paranormal experiences on the res is that they don't happen as often as they used to. If you talk to one of our elders, they have endless stories and even more advice to give you about how to protect yourself compared to now. One of the explanations that was given to this guy about the shadow thing was that it was evidence that someone had been doing an unauthorized shaking tent ceremony. If you don't know what that is, you can look it up, but it's basically, and I'm generalizing, like a Ouija board session that takes place inside a tent of some sort. People stand around the tent, while the medicine man or medicine woman goes inside and asks questions. The tent begins to shake, and you can hear the voices of spirits coming through. I've never personally been to one, because we haven't had a good enough reason to make one. But typically, our ancestors used shaking tent ceremonies when they were starving in the dead of winter and needed some direction on where the nearest food source was. My mom's been to one, and her story is absolutely crazy. She described multiple voices of men and women, only speaking the native tongue, and they were upset that the people were doing a shaking tent ceremony when they weren't on the verge of death. The people there had to explain that they were only doing the ceremony to prove that it was real, as we had been losing our culture as a result of residential schools. But the spirits were angry about this, saying that the bridge between the two worlds should never be opened unless absolutely necessary, because you don't know who you're communicating with. It could be evil spirits, and it could be good ones. It could be ancestors, but you never know. Anyways, the elders told him that the spirit crossed over into our world because of a shaking tent ceremony. Someone on the reserve has been doing them without consultation of the elders. So, we started thinking about who would do that, without proper guidance and without good enough reason to do so. Then, two of the drunkest dudes at this point start saying shit like, I'm not scared. That thing could show up right now, and it couldn't do shit. Basically egging it on. All of us were looking at each other like, Why the fuck would you disrespect an evil spirit? That's exactly how you attract it to you. And that's when I decided to leave the sunroom where everyone was hanging out. I went to the living room to console my drunk, crying friend, when I noticed that the rocking chair outside on the porch was going back and forth. I looked away immediately, refusing to make direct eye contact, but I did look at it from my peripheral vision. Anyways, I'm inside the cottage, and I keep seeing this rocking chair go back and forth, and back and forth. But another thing we're raised to do in our culture is to ignore paranormal experiences. Spirits feed on the energy that people put towards them, so if you freak out, if you get angry, if you yell at it or start crying, that's exactly what it wants, and it will stick around once it gets a reaction. It thrives on energy of any kind, So while I knew something fucked up was happening on that rocking chair, I wasn't about to pay it any attention. 5 minutes or so go by, and I'm still seeing it move in the corner of my eye. That's when my friend screams, and she runs to the other side of the sunroom. My other friend sprints to where a girl was sitting and bursts through the French doors onto the balcony. All of this happens in a split second, but I immediately go to the patio and ask what's going on. A girl is crying on the couch with friends all around her. She claims to have seen the spirit, which we later nickname Kokogi, Algonquin word for monster. She said that she was listening to the boys talk about the spirit when she saw one boy's face as he was looking out onto the balcony behind her. She turned around to see what he was looking at, and directly on the other side of the window was the shadow spirit sitting on the rocking chair, smiling at her, literally 3 feet from her. That's when the boy sprints towards it and bursts through the French doors. I walk outside to find the boy, and he's on the lawn, staring into the woods. I call his name and he looks up at me. All he says is, "Get everyone inside." And the tone of his voice just makes me automatically obey. I get all the drunk teenagers inside the cottage. This is when the phrase, "Come at me, bro," was just gaining popularity, so you can imagine the drunk kids yelling that into the woods. It was terrible. I eventually get everyone inside, and the girl is now in a trance, freaking everyone out. She doesn't speak to anyone. She doesn't say anything but, "I want to go home." The boy comes back inside and tells everyone to clean up, and that we should leave as soon as possible. Everyone has trash bags and are cleaning away all of the beer bottles and cans away. Everyone goes into the cottage, and it's only me and the boy in the sunroom now. I look to him for answers, and all he says is, "It's outside." I nod and start cleaning faster. The sooner we're out of here, the sooner we're away from that thing. As we're cleaning in the sunroom, we hear knocking on the windows in multiple places. The entire sunroom is made of glass, but it's dark out, so you can't even see outside. I immediately look to the boy, and he just says, "Ignore it." Within 2 seconds, someone comes running out of the bathroom and says, "I'll fucking kill whoever's outside knocking on the bathroom window." But everyone's inside and accounted for. Someone else comes running out of the bedroom, saying that there was knocking on the window in there as well. Now everyone's freaking out, and me, the boy, and one of our friends are the only ones sober enough to calm everyone down. We get the place clean, and get outside to the cars immediately. Everyone's getting into the trucks, and I'm standing with the boy. He's relaxed. But then all of a sudden he looks behind me and shoves me inside his truck. We peel out of the driveway and drop everyone off. A few days later, I end up hanging out with the boy, and he tells me the story from his perspective. He said that when the boy started talking shit about the spirit, it appeared on the rocking chair behind the girl. He said he made eye contact with it and couldn't look away. They were staring each other down, and that's when the girl saw the boy's expression. He said it was instinct to defend the people he was with and ran towards it. He said that the feeling he was getting from the Kokogi was almost like he was daring him to do something. He said the second he got up, the Kokogi stood and ran into the woods, disappearing from the patio in a blur. The boy ran onto the porch and was looking around the lawn when he saw it standing at the tree line. Looking right at him was a smile on its face. He said the whole time it felt like it was mocking him. I called the boy's name and it disappeared. He didn't see it again until everyone was getting into the trucks, which explains why he suddenly pushed me inside. He said it was standing on the far end of the truck, super close to us. Later that night, when he dropped everyone off, they realized they never locked the door. So he went back to the cottage, but his friend, whose cottage it was too scared to go in. The boy goes in by himself, but the second he opens the door, he sees the thing standing inside the living room. He locks the door as quick as he can, and they peel out of the driveway. So yeah, sightings continued for a few days after that. We definitely weren't the only people on the res to have experiences like this. And then it stopped, all of a sudden. It was the talk of the res. Everyone was curious about what happened to it. Would it come back? What was it? Etc. But word ended up getting around that there were sightings north of our community. White people in the town just north of us were having sightings. Then other reservations were having sightings as well. It's like it was travelling north, the way the stories were going. Anyways, it's 2018 now, and no one else on my reserve has had any sightings of this particular thing. But yeah, that's my story.
I don't know if this fits here, but my 15-year-old special needs cousin just passed away a couple of days ago. And that night, I had a dream. She's never been able to walk or talk, and she told me everything was alright. I cried and hugged her, and she said she felt the hugs we'd given her before, and said she was sorry she couldn't hug back until now. That same night, she came to my grandma, who was her primary caretaker, to tell her what dress she wanted her to wear to her funeral. My grandpa just passed away a few months ago, and I really believe he went first so she could have someone to be there with her. My family moved into a small house in Northeast Ohio when I was about 5 years old. I had a bedroom on the first floor for a few years and everything went fine. The entire upstairs attic was my parents' bedroom since it was one giant room. When I was 12, I switched rooms with them so I could have the big room. The attic always gave me a strange feeling, but nothing horribly off-putting. Sometimes I would be sitting at my desk alone, and I would manage to spook myself out with what I thought was just my wild imagination. I never felt completely alone, for some reason. A few months after staying in the attic, a young boy appeared in my dreams, probably about 6 years old. He was almost blue in color, had short dark hair. He wore little shorts and a button-down shirt, almost like a 1960s type school uniform. He always had a neutral expression on his face. He never spoke in any of my dreams. He was just there. He would occasionally point to things or just stare at me. I never once felt like he was evil or malicious. I think he just wanted to be seen by me. I would always wake up feeling like I was being watched after seeing him in my dreams. One night, I had a dream that he was standing next to my bed staring at me. And when I woke up, I felt the overwhelming presence close to my bed. I felt sick, like something was horribly wrong, but still didn't feel like the boy was evil. Just sad and lonely, maybe. Like maybe he was having nightmares and wanted to be by me. I started to recognize his presence whenever I would feel like I wasn't alone in the room. Fast forward to when I was 16. I hadn't seen the boy in my dreams for quite a while, until my grandmother passed away. I fell asleep the night before her wake and saw the boy in my dreams. I was in a field and he was standing on top of a hill with his back turned towards me. Keep in mind, I've been dreaming about him for about 4 years and he has never spoken to me before. He turns around and looks at me, and with a slow, soft voice he says, "You know, her feet are cold." Then I woke up. I felt strange because he literally had never spoken to me before, but then randomly tells me something about her cold feet. So I went to my grandma's open casket wake that day, and my mom started to throw a fit because along with my grandma's favorite belongings that were placed on her body in the casket, there was a pair of her favorite slippers on top. My mom wanted the slippers to be put on my grandma's feet because her feet were always cold when she was alive. She wanted to make sure my grandma's feet were warm in the afterlife. I had no idea that my mom even asked the funeral home to put the slippers on her. Then I realized that the boy who often visited me in my dreams was letting me know that my grandma's feet were cold. Although I still saw him in my dreams and felt his presence, he never spoke to me again after this. I always felt a special appreciation for him. I felt more connected and at ease when he appeared in my dreams. or whenever I felt his presence. He was a guardian of some sort, and I grew to love him. I don't live with my parents anymore, and ever since I moved out, he stopped appearing in my dreams. I miss him now and then, and I'll go into my old bedroom and sit on the floor just so he can see me, so he knows I'm okay and I'm still thinking about him. This was a real experience of mine, and I've been waiting to share this with people for years. Maybe I'm crazy, but I know what I felt. This is told to me by my parents. When my twin brother and I were about 6 months old, we started crying as babies do in the middle of the night. They had a baby monitor sitting next to their bed. My parents, both groggy and half asleep, debating who's going to deal with this one. The baby monitor is flipping out, and a crystal clear man's voice. "Shh, it's okay. Don't cry." My parents jumped out of the bed as fast as they could and ran to the room. There was no one in there. We had both stopped crying at this point and had smiles on our faces. My older brother and dad went looking around the house and backyard, but found nothing. It freaked them out for a few nights, and so on. This wasn't the only incident. Fast forward when I was about 3 years old. I would always sit in front of the bathroom's doorway and roll the ball there. My dad couldn't figure out why, but just blew it off as a kid thing. He started to notice I was giggling and pointing at something in there. My dad finally asked me what I was giggling at. I responded with, "The man with the owie on his head is making funny faces." My dad said he felt his blood go cold looking into the semi-dark bathroom. My parents decided to reconstruct the bathroom, new bathtub, shower, etc., hiring some house remodelers. As they were destroying the bathroom wall, they freaked out, finding small fragments of a human skull in the shower wall. My dad started to remember what I said about the man with the owie on his head. My dad tracked down the previous owner of the house, a lady in her late 40s. She explained that her husband had shot himself in the bathtub a few years before he moved in. He loved children, but sadly never had any of his own. It explained why he was making friendly faces towards my brother and I. After discovering this, my parents didn't really mind his presence too much. Almost feels like he's still around, even after all these years and moving. This is the real thing that happened. No exaggeration. A little backstory. My grandparents met at university because my grandpa would air his stinky shoes on his dorm windowsill across from the nursing school dorm window from my grandma. They're opposites and completely in love. The kind that led him to hide little gifts for her each week for 60 years. The kind where they no longer need words to communicate with each other. He was her protector, and she was his everything. My grandpa passed away a few years ago, after a long, tragic battle with cancer. My family moved Grandma into an assisted living home after her mental health declined rapidly after his passing. I went to visit my grandma in a different city, so I stayed on a cot in her living room while there. In the middle of the night, I woke up to a loud, unmistakable, deep, guttural laugh of my grandpa coming from her bedroom. It was his laugh. I know it very well. I know it as well as I know his face if I saw him on the street. Then I heard her chuckle and speak in a murmured voice, but couldn't make out the words. I tiptoed over to her bedroom, where I found her asleep, with a huge smile on her face. He always used humor to cheer her up in life, and for whatever unexplained reason, he still is. I went to a friend's house and drank some cheap blue-colored vodka. Almost instantly, I felt something wrong with my stomach after taking that shot. I stopped drinking and tried to ignore the pain, says it wasn't that bad at the time. Eventually, I went home, but the pain became worse and became unbearable. I thought I could just sleep this off and see how I felt in the morning. When I woke up, the pain was still there, and now it's a strong, throbbing pain. Walking has become an issue. Cue my trip to the emergency room. While this was going on, my mother was thousands of miles away in a Dominican Republic family. While there, she and one of my aunts went to one of those fortune tellers and palm readers. My mother didn't believe in that stuff. In fact, she was against it and called it devil's magic. She opted out and said she would wait outside while my aunt gets ripped off by a gypsy. She said all of this to the fortune teller's face. Fortune teller didn't take any offense. She wished my mother well. As she was heading back inside, she asked my mother if she had any children, which she replied yes. The fortune teller calmly tells her to come home and make sure we're alright. Back in the States, I'm being discharged from the hospital. The nurse told me I had a stomach ache and was reacting to something I ate. Well, no shit. Anyway, the trip turned into a waste of time, and I had no answers for the pain or a remedy. So I go home, turn on the TV, and lay down on the couch. By this time, eating isn't a possibility, and all I can do is drink water, and I can't use the bathroom. Walking just hurts too much. Not 15 minutes after I get home, my mother calls the house asking how we are doing, if anything is wrong. My sister answered the phone. She says we're all fine, except for Chaos, who came down with some stomach issues and is laid out on the couch. When I tell you my mother flipped the fuck out, I mean I could hear from across the room over the cell phone receiver. Told me the story of the fortune teller and how she was being snotty to her and that she feels she might have placed a curse on her. So anyway, back to the hospital I go. My mother made me promise not to accept any crap diagnosis from that hack nurse. Speak to a doctor. Get answers. Do not under any circumstances leave that fucking hospital. Well, when we went back, my sister raised hell and got me rushed past the waiting room into an MRI or an X-ray or something like that. From there they rushed me into surgery. My appendix was about to blow any minute now. I'm not a very religious man, but I thank God for that fortune teller to this day. I would have died on the couch that day if it wasn't for her. A few simple words from a complete stranger on an island 1,000 miles away made such a huge impact on my life. That's some butterfly effect shit right there. My granddad, Tony, passed away. A few things about my granddad. He smoked really strong tobacco, and my mom would tell him off for smoking in the house. He also loved to wind my mom up by moving her wedding photo, which hung above the fire. Anyway, odd things started to happen a year after he died. We would smell his tobacco when we woke up in the morning, and my mom's wedding photo would be on the wall. Also, whenever his favorite football team was playing, our TV would change the channel when his team scored. We weren't overly concerned, and we have always believed in spirits. We would come downstairs in the morning and greet our granddad as if he was at the table. This continued until me and my sister moved out. My mom moved not long after we moved out. We never actually saw him though. Fast forward 22 years, and I have a daughter of my own, and she is 8. The other evening I was in the bedroom, and my daughter was supposed to be asleep, but I heard her talking. I got up to investigate, and as soon as I got in her room, I saw her sitting on her bed, chatting away and explaining what she had done at school that day. I asked her who she was speaking to, and she said she was speaking to Tony. It took me a couple of seconds to process what she said. Obviously, I was only 5 when my grandpa passed away, so clearly he never got a chance to meet my daughter. I didn't say anything to her about who she was talking to. I just stroked her head and told her she had school in the morning and had to go to sleep. I looked at the end of her bed where she was facing and didn't see anyone. And I'm not going to lie and say I wasn't disappointed. The next morning I got down a photo of Granddad. Now my daughter has never seen a photo of him, as these are all kept in a box on top of the wardrobe. I didn't say anything to my daughter. I just left the photo on the kitchen table. She sat down for breakfast and let out a little squeal. She held up the photo of my granddad and said, "This is Tony. He comes and sees me sometimes and asks me about school. He loves it when we talk about books." It's strange, but I am extremely comforted by the fact that my granddad is still watching over us, and even over his great-granddaughter too.